Bobby the Brain. Chapter 5. Joining the WWF. Joining the WWE was not the first time I met Vince McMahon Jr. We met at an exhibition for Muhammad Ali in Chicago in 1976. Ali was preparing for his match in Japan with Antonio Inoki. I walked in with Aldo Ruscha and Nick Bockwinkel. We introduced ourselves. Vince just looked up and nodded. A very cold reception. Vince always wore these wild-colored outfits. I told Linda, his wife, that if they put a light in the closet, that wouldn't happen. She just shrugged and said, "He likes colors." Every year, Vince had a tailor come down from Rhode Island to make his suits. The tailor matched the lining, shirt, tie, and everything. Vince kept his suits in this big cedar closet at his home. He would wear the suits in the winter, but when spring came, he would give them all away. Every season a new wardrobe. I guess if I ever see a bum lying in the alley wearing an orange suit, I'll know where he got it from. I never had a conversation with Vince until that day I called him from Denver to come into the WWF. When you first meet Vince, a honeymoon starts, but it's over real quick. You could always talk to Vince. He always had time to listen to me and gave me some good advice. He said, "Remember this. 2 people can solve any problem, unless one's an asshole." At the Garden that night, I met Vince for the first time since the Inoki-Ali fight, but I made the mistake of having a cigar. Vince barked, "Put that out." He hated smoking. We were doing Saturday night's main event in Milwaukee in 1989 when Randy Savage turned on Hulk Hogan to set up WrestleMania 5. Jesse Ventura was in the back smoking a cigar. Vince noticed right away and said, "Who the hell is smoking here? Put that out." That was Vince's only pet peeve. The only time I saw him get mad was when someone smoked. Jesse put his cigar out in the announcer's dressing room. Later on, I saw the cigar in an ashtray. I picked it up but wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. Later, I was in Vince's dressing room talking to him. Vince had his tuxedo on, and I noticed his other clothes hanging on a rack. After Vince left, I took Jesse's cigar and put it in the breast pocket of Vince's suit coat under his hanky. I never found out what happened, but I'm sure Jesse got blamed for it. Vince always wanted to be a worker. He was 14 or 15 when he started hanging out with Dr. Jerry Graham. Jerry had a Cadillac and would drive down Broadway in New York with the top down. There was Vince wearing a red, ruffled shirt and bleached blonde hair. When his old man found out about it, he went nuts. My first appearance in the WWF was in Madison Square Garden in New York. I walked to the ring, got on the microphone, and said I was looking for new talent. It was funny. I walked into the Garden that night and everybody knew me. This was before the business went national, but those fans bought the wrestling magazines. Some promoters like Vern Gagne never understood the value of those magazines. I told him that if fans are going to pay $3 for a lousy seat to see some wrestlers, they'd pay 50 cents for a magazine with every wrestler in it. I was originally supposed to manage Jesse Ventura in the WWF. Vince asked me if I'd mind, and I agreed because we always got along. When I got to New York, Vince told me that Jesse had some circulation problems in his legs and he couldn't be there. He asked me if I wanted to work with John Studd. Again, I agreed. I just wanted to be there. I would have managed Donald Duck. In fact, I think I have. The following Sunday, the WWF had a show at the Met Center in Bloomington, Minnesota. I wore a mask to the building that night and came in the back way. I put a rock in my shoe so I could change my walk, which I think is distinctive because I'm bow-legged. I even changed luggage. No one knew who I was. I walked past fans who followed the AWA and into the dressing room where I saw Roddy Piper. I shoved him. He turned around like he was going to hit me. I took the mask off to reveal who I was. Studd got in the ring and said he had a new manager. I walked out, and the weasel chants started up like I was never gone. John was a real nice, quiet man. He loved his family and always wanted to be home. He always wanted to do the right thing. I would get annoyed with people on the plane bugging me when I was trying to sleep. He would say, "Be nice," and would sign the autograph. He was a real decent man, and the business was far below him. I don't remember him ever even saying damn it or swearing at all. He was a lot like the Howard Sprague character in Mayberry RFD. John and I were in Pittsburgh working a show. Sometimes you get a ring announcer who wasn't with the company, some old guy who didn't like wrestling and didn't want to be there but loved the $50 and the night out from Maud. The announcer got in the ring and grabbed the microphone that hung from the ceiling. He announced Studd but didn't announce me. He walked out of the ring, and I grabbed the microphone. I was ready to announce myself. The guy controlling the microphone obviously didn't want me to have it, so he pulled it up as I was introducing myself. We started this tug of war. I grabbed the microphone with both hands and pulled hard. The wire broke, and the microphone hit me on the face, bloodied my nose, and knocked me on my ass. Stud looked at me and asked, "What happened?" "You know, I don't care if they ever know who I am," I said. "I want to get out of here." I just beat the hell out of myself with a microphone. I was glad to be working with old friends like Stud, Gene Okerlund, and Hulk Hogan. One night in New York City, Gene was out on the town with Hogan, if you know what I mean. Gene always liked to suck up to him. Hulkster would pay the bill and let him come back to the hotel in his stretch limo. Gene arrived at the hotel and immediately staggered upstairs to go to bed. About 4 o'clock in the morning, Gene had nothing on, got out of bed to relieve himself. He walked to the bathroom door, opened it up, and shut it behind him. He immediately realized that he wasn't in the bathroom. He was in the hall of the 12th floor, naked as the day he was born except with a mustache. At first, Gene did not know what to do. He walked over to the window, took the drapes down, and wrapped them around him. The elevator took him to the lobby with Gene covered in the window dressing. He told the desk clerk who he was and that he had stepped outside of his room instead of going into the bathroom. The desk clerk laughed and said, "Don't worry about that, Mr. Okerlund. Mickey Mantle stays here and he usually brings a friend up to his room. When she steals his watch, he chases her out of the room. The door shuts behind him and he comes down here the same way too." Later, I told Okerlund, "Gene, you're a Hall of Famer." Hogan, on the other hand, is a legitimate Hall of Famer. I remember that night in 1979 when I was wrestling in Marietta, Georgia. You have to understand that the buildings weren't like the way they are now, where you have 20,000-seat arenas with rails around the ring, police protection, and pyro. The Cobb County Civic Center held about 2,500 people and, on that night, there were 1,500 there. I was wrestling a tag match. It was the first time I met my partner for that night. He was 6 feet 7 inches, weighed 310 pounds, and had this enormous amount of hair on his body. On that night, he shaved all the hair off except for a big heart of hair on the middle of his chest. After the match, we jumped down to go back to the dressing room, and he was walking ahead of me. Some fan jumped out, and my partner stopped in his tracks. He didn't know what to do because he was so green. He hadn't wrestled that much, let alone faced off with a fan. He was nervous. I said, "Let me ahead of you." So I went to get ahead of him and I start walking. The mark jumps out in front of me. I grabbed the guy and threw him to the ground, and the Marietta police hauled him away. My partner that night, Sterling Golden, went on to do something more in wrestling. He got rid of the boots and trunks and got new ring wear, this time yellow. I always kept my distance from Hogan because of our ongoing feud from the 80s in the AWA. Even when he turned heel in WCW, I didn't root for him because I wanted to protect the business. The hottest angle I was involved in was Hogan versus Andre the Giant. I fought him in the AWA and the WWF for all those years. Why, all of a sudden, would I turn after 1 week if I didn't really like the guy? It didn't make sense. I talked about how I liked what he was doing, but I didn't like him. Hogan was the one who got me into the WWE, and I was the one who got him into the AWA. When I left Georgia in 1979 and returned to Minneapolis, I told Vern about this guy. I said, "He's huge, has a hell of a body, and people look at him in awe. He's a little green, but he can get better." Back then, I could tell that Hogan didn't care about wrestling. He cared about entertaining and making money. Hogan went from Atlanta to his first run in the WWF. Vince McMahon Sr. always gave guys Irish names like Bugsy McGraw and Blackjack Mulligan. He gave him the name Hulk Hogan. He was doing well in New York. One night, Sylvester Stallone was at one of his matches and saw him. He sent word back to the dressing room that he wanted Hogan to play Thunderlips in Rocky III. When I came back from a tour of Japan, Vern brought in Hogan. He was hot from the beginning. They tried to make him a heel and gave him a manager named Johnny Valiant, who wasn't a very good one. Hogan was beating 2 to 3 guys a night in handicap matches, but the people just loved him. Hulk Hogan and the Crusher were the biggest things to ever hit the AWA. Hogan was the logical one to go after Nick for the belt. I was managing Nick at the time. Perhaps to get Hogan over as a heel, they should have put him with me and made Nick a babyface. But I don't know if I could have done that, even with my heat. The AWA was doing great business before Hogan, but after he showed up, they were selling out. We worked in St. Paul, doing $150,000 to $200,000. But with Hogan versus Bockwinkel, they had to rent the building next door and put in closed-circuit television. They did over $300,000. He was phenomenal. I've never seen a character or wrestler like that. Andre was a phenomenon, but I wasn't with him every day when he was starting out as a babyface. I wasn't in a territory with him. I was with Hogan in Atlanta, Minneapolis, and New York and saw him become a superstar, a phenomenon like nothing before. I've heard the question, why didn't they give Hogan the AWA title? Many times. They were going to in St. Paul. It was Hogan's last match before he went over to work for Antonio Inoki in Japan and make some big money. Vern came into the locker room and told Hogan, "You're going to beat Nick, and we're going to give you the belt. I want you to call Inoki and tell him I'm doing your booking since I own the champion." Vern thought Hogan was dumb enough to fall for it. But Hogan was smart and he learned that he couldn't just get the belt. Vern would book him, his program with Inoki would be changed, and he would make less money. Hogan turned down the offer. Vern said okay, then get disqualified, thinking Hogan would change his mind because Vern was taking the belt away. He didn't. That was the whole deal. He didn't want to be controlled by Vern, and he would have been. He wanted to be free to go to Japan in the winter and make $100,000 a day. The Japanese treated him like a king. What it all came down to is that he didn't need the AWA as much as the AWA needed him. And that was the beginning of the end for Hulk Hogan and the AWA. I've been watching pro wrestling for 46 years, and I have never seen people react to anybody the way they did to Hulk Hogan. I've never seen anything like the control he had over them, the way they dressed like him, the way people cut their hair like him. People made themselves bald to look like him. The amount of merchandise this man sold was unreal. I saw people cry at ringside when Hulk was in trouble. I've seen kids look at him like an idol, somebody they thought they'd never get to see. I've never seen an athlete like that in my life. Sure, it's acting, but still he's an athlete. A lot of people say he's not a good athlete, but he's a very good one. He puts a lot of asses in a lot of seats, and that's how I judge how good of a guy he is. Vince decided to use Tiny Lister, who starred with Hogan in his first movie, No Holds Barred, as Zeus. He was a big guy with this goofy eye. But Vince was going to make him into a wrestler, and Hogan had to work with him. The guy had never been in the ring in his life, and had no idea what it was about. Vince pulled off a pay-per-view with Hogan walking Zeus through everything. He took a guy who was big, green, and couldn't see, and got him through a whole program, doing interviews, and ending up with a pay-per-view match that made money. Despite what other people think, I say Hogan was a fairly good hand in the ring. Hulk Hogan's fame did create a lot of jealousy among other wrestlers. Hogan and Jesse Ventura never liked each other. Jesse was terribly jealous of Hogan, who always drew more money than him. Hogan knew Jesse didn't like him, and he would do things to piss Jesse off all the time. Ventura was never a threat to Hogan. Jesse had a great ability to talk, but once that bell rang and the boa came off, he couldn't take bumps. He wouldn't even have been a good job guy. In the AWA, the promoters teamed him with Adrian Adonis, and Adrian wondered why he always got pinned instead of Jesse. It was because Adrian could do it better. Jesse had a good talk and he dressed as odd as anyone, so he made himself amusing to people. Jesse could draw you money, but nothing like Hogan. I don't know why Jesse left the WWF in 1990. It was probably something about Hogan because that's why he left WCW. Jesse thought Hogan got him fired, and Hogan was glad Jesse was gone. Jesse wouldn't put him over on TV. He would just sit there, rocking his chair, and not say anything about Hogan. Sometimes he would sound unprepared, but Jesse was very smart, and he could make it sound that way. If he didn't want to put someone over, like Hogan, he just acted like he didn't know much about him. It didn't help the product, and it wasn't what they were paying him for. They should have just put the two in a room and let them go at it. But Hogan would have come out on top. I remember when guys would get their booking sheets to see where they would be wrestling. At the height of its popularity in the 80s, the WWF was running 3 shows a night. The guys would be in Seattle one night, in Tampa the next night in Boston, and then in San Diego. They would crisscross the country. Guys didn't care about that. They looked to see if they were on the same card as Hogan. Or should I say cards? Hogan, Paul Orndorff, and I were working a program. Business was on fire back then in the mid-80s. We were at Nassau, Long Island, on a Saturday night. It was sold out with 20,000 people. The main event was Hogan versus Orndorff, and they put us on third. A lot of promoters always put the main event on last. Vince always put the main event on third or fourth, so he could have an intermission and announce a return match with a stipulation on the next card and sell tickets to that event. When we got done there, we ran out of the building. The WWF took us in a limo to MacArthur Airport and put the three of us on a private Learjet. The three of us got on the jet, Hogan in yellow, Orndorff in red, and me in my sequin suit. We looked like Liberace's backup group. We arrived at O'Hare in Chicago, which is an hour behind New York, at 10:30 for another sold-out show. The police from Rosemont picked us up and drove us to the Rosemont Horizon. We drove down the ramp and quickly got out of the car. Blackjack Lanza, one of the agents, told us keep going straight on. Intermission is over. The three of us walked to the ring and did the same thing we had done 2 hours before 1,000 miles away. Business was good because of Hogan and Vince. From that came WrestleMania. From WrestleMania came a lot of memories, both good and bad. There was a big party after WrestleMania 1 at the Rainbow Room. Liberace, one of the celebrities who appeared on the show, was sitting by a chair with his hand on a rail. I was on the other side of the rail with my wife, talking to people. I leaned back and accidentally sat on Liberace's hand. "Oh, excuse me," I said. Liberace looked at Cindy and said, "Nice tush." I never found out if he was talking to her or me. I was in the hospital the morning of WrestleMania 2 in Tampa, Florida. I had a myogram done where they shot dye in my spine. In 1983, I broke my neck in Japan after this kid named Onita came off the top rope with a leg drop and dropped his leg on my face. I never had pain in my hand, just from my wrist up to my neck. It bothered me for years, but we didn't have any insurance. No one would take care of you, so I didn't have enough money to have an operation. I couldn't take the time off. I had a wife and a kid to feed. Someone from the WWF told me that if I didn't make WrestleMania, I was fired. I checked out of the hospital that morning after having a myogram the day before. The nurse asked, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Los Angeles to wrestle. See you later." I caught a plane to LA, and we did WrestleMania. I took a red-eye back, returned to the hospital, checked in at 5 in the morning, and went back to bed. That's the way they browbeat you? You had to work or you were fired. Talking to me like that, it was a disgrace. I managed King Kong Bundy in the main event against Hulk Hogan at that WrestleMania. He was fun. He wore a black tunic to the ring, and he was lily white with a bald head. I used to call him Shamu because he was white and black and about the size of the whale. We were sitting in first class on a plane to San Francisco. Bundy was asleep. The stewardess asked me, "Anything I can get you?" I said, "Yes, I'll have a scotch and water." She looked at Bundy. "Would your friend like anything?" "Yes, bring him a pail of fish." Bundy heard what I said. He leaned over on me and slept the whole way to San Francisco practically on top of me. He got me back. I also managed Hulk Hogan's opponent in the main event of WrestleMania 3, Andre the Giant. The morning of WrestleMania, I had breakfast with Andre before we went over to the Pontiac Stadium. Andre had his usual, an omelet and 6 bottles of wine. When we arrived at the building, we met up with Vince McMahon and adjourned to the steam room of the Detroit Lions training center to go over the finish for the evening and discuss what would go on in the ring. Vince was telling us that we were going to the ring on these forklifts, heels first and then the babyface, Hogan. They would raise the forklifts as high as they could, maybe 7 or 8 feet in the air. They would have these 5x5 platforms, ring ropes, and everything. Vince told us that the forklift was so big that it could only back up to leave because there was no room for it to turn around. Andre had a question for Vince. "How big are the aisles?" "Well, they're pretty big," Vince responded. "I'm going to push over Hogan's forklift." Vince was shocked. "While he's on it?" Andre said, "I don't know." "Andre," Vince said, "you can't do that. There's a guy driving it." "I don't care." After the meeting, Vince pulled me aside. "If he starts to push the forklift over, watch him." I said, "Vince, me and 93,000 people will watch him, and that's all we'll be able to do." Everything worked out. Andre didn't tip anybody or anything over. When I was up on that forklift with Andre and we started going out, I knew he wasn't going to do anything. He couldn't get back from the ring to get Hogan anyway because his knee was bothering him. We went out and saw 93,000 people, a world indoor attendance record. That didn't click in my head right away. What clicked in my head was, I wonder how many people are watching this on pay-per-view. I'm riding on this forklift in front of all these people and I thought, my God, this is history. Records can be broken, like the one set by Babe Ruth and Roger Maris. This record will hold. To be part of it was a phenomenal experience. At WrestleMania 4 at Trump Plaza, Donald Trump bought the show. He came backstage to meet the boys with about 5 bodyguards and Ivana, his wife at the time. He was a real nice guy and shook hands with everyone back there.
Rick Rude and I went out for our match with Jake Roberts.
During the bout, Jake put Rude over the security rail backward right in front of Ivana. He told Rude to move. Jake grabbed his snake out of the bag and charged him.
Rude ducked, and the snake went right into Ivana's face.
She flew backward in her chair with her chalice of wine on the floor and her legs up. I thought, oh God, if Vince hears about this, we're in trouble. I looked over at Trump. He winked at me. He was glad she got knocked on her ass. Ivana stood up, dusted herself off, and told her bodyguard, you should have shot the fucking snake.
I also wrestled at WrestleMania 4 in a match with the Islanders against the British Bulldogs and Coco Beware.
In those days, the Bulldogs would bring an actual bulldog, named Matilda, to the ring. Sometimes they would sick her on their opponents. But Matilda wouldn't go for the wrestler, she would only go for his shoe. During the match, I was supposed to go to Matilda so she would chase me out of the ring and down the aisle. Then I was supposed to fall down, and she was supposed to bite me on the arm, which was protected by a dog suit. I was practicing in the dressing room with her. Nothing. I couldn't get her to do anything. The only thing she would do is fart.
Dynamite Kid, one of the Bulldogs, fed her hot dogs all day. This big bulldog would not bite me.
She just sat there and farted.
I'm in the ring with a dog suit on that was made for a guy who wore a medium suit.
It felt like it was made up of carpet, and I couldn't breathe in that bastard. The end of the match came, and I took off out of the ring. Mind you, I was already blown up.
I hadn't wrestled in 2 years, and it was a long way from the ring to the dressing room.
I saw Matilda coming behind me with Davy Boy Smith. But she wasn't running fast. Davy was trying to force her to run. I couldn't go anymore. I fell down in the aisle. I told Davy to let her jump me right there. Matilda got on top of me and started sniffing the dog suit. Obviously, she smelled another dog on it, because she began to hump me. She wouldn't bite me, just hump me. I thought,
oh my God, it has come to this now.
All the way from the assassins to being a dog chew. I got up, walked back to the dressing room, and told the boys backstage, don't worry about the payoff. I already got screwed. At WrestleMania 6, I'll never forget a woman who was sitting in the front row with her husband. I managed the Barbarian that evening, and he used to wear a leather and fur vest with chains. It looked like he found it on the road. After the match, this woman and her husband came backstage, and she approached me to see if she could have his vest. I went back and asked the Barbarian, and he said, no. I told her that he wasn't there.
The woman turned out to be Mary Tyler Moore. What the hell was she going to do with leather, fur, and chains? WrestleMania 6 also featured my ring return against Terry Taylor, who was then known as the Red Rooster. For the record, it wasn't my idea to give him that gimmick, and I didn't want to manage him anyway. Vince asked me if I would. Sometimes you say yes just for the TV exposure. Besides, it was stupid enough, and I thought I could have some fun with it. That WrestleMania match was a popcorn match. It was right before the main event, and that's when people go out to get their popcorn. It was timed, and we had some spots set up to go 6 to 7 minutes. Vince walked up to us before the match. All we need is 30 seconds. I told Terry, I'll give you a turnbuckle charge, you move. I'll hit the post and bounce back, and you pin me. But we've got 5 minutes of spots to do. I told him, after the match, when we get to the back, you can do them. They wanted him to work less for the same money. He really was a Red Rooster. My last WrestleMania was the 9th one. Everyone was dressed up like they were from the Roman Empire. I was supposed to come out on a camel wearing a toga. Now anybody could come out on a camel properly, but I decided to come out backward just to be the brain and be different. Randy Savage even pulled my robe up to reveal my bright blue shorts. Wearing that muumuu was kind of scary.